Hey, welcome to your weekly Corner Späti. It is me, Nick, joined with Uma.
Hello.
And very special guest, Almut Rochowanksi, a activist, writer, and analyst. Thank you so much for coming on. I got the name right this time, I think, more or less.
Yes, you did.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me.
I guess we should just get right into it. As you were mentioning off mic before, you wrote you wrote a piece for Jacobin originally, as you said, in spring, summer, about kind of Europe's position within this, the monolith, more or less, of the United States, how to then position itself in between the United States and Russia, and how this was ever changing when you got to the English translation in November. So I guess, kind of coming off of the back of a very turbulent 2025, this is also a topic that we talk about a lot on the show. I feel that then our listener has a general idea, but what have been then the most general, biggest kind of dilemmas that Europe has then found itself in within particularly the surprises of the Trump administration, particularly starting with like Russia and Ukraine. We can take steps back further, but just simply 2025 served as a very shocking year for Europe, it feels like.
So that requires an answer at several levels, I think, a layer. So first of all, the article I wrote when I was first asked to think about writing it, that was in early 2025. It was like, let's write about sort of this weird neo-militarism and neo-bellicism in Europe, and sort of this new arms race. And what's actually going on here? Like, what are the causes of this? What is sort of the strategic thinking behind it? Whereby strategic doesn't necessarily mean rational, right? Where's this coming from? And so I started writing it in spring, and then I finished it in summer. And you're sort of racing behind time because at the same time, some very interesting things are happening with the Trump administration. And it became a little bit about that. And that is that the Trump administration really did say sort of goodbye to the sort of, the post-Cold War unipolar moment, liberal internationalist, triumphant, primacy, whatever you want to call it, in which I had sort of been thinking and writing about for some time, even before Trump, like, why are Europeans so wedded to this? And my analysis was because it allowed them to be the Nepo baby of primacy, right? Just to punch above their weight in benefiting from an international order that they didn't actually, sustain in terms of military power. Certainly Europe has a lot of other forms of power, and I actually think other forms of power are hugely important. They're probably more important than military power. And I should say that I am a lifelong activist, like an anti-militarist activist. So I do work on peace, and I'm very critical of militarism. And so as I was writing this, the sort of what was happening, and we've watched this all last year in like one iteration after the next, we had this moment where the Europeans have like the rug pulled out from under them. They fall to their feet, and then they sort of scramble back up, and then they have the rug pulled out again. And it was almost a like cartoonish effect. This was happening again and again and again. And in between, they were just prostrating themselves in front of Trump and just being really embarrassing. And you just have to ask yourself, like, why are they being like this? And lots of people say, oh, they're just vassals. And I find that very insufficient because, first of all, because it's it's one of those like false metaphors, because actually, like, I don't want to go into like the feudal system and like what vassals actually are, but basically, but what it makes it sound like as if they're there for the humiliation. They just love the humiliation. Like it was almost like it's an erotic thing for them, like some sort of like BDSM thing. And obviously,
I mean, some of the statements like Mark Rutte have made me question sometimes.
And yes, and so like I do want to say, so that could explain it for a few of them, but couldn't explain it for all 27 of them, or however we're counting it. Especially since like governments change, but they keep reproducing the same behavior. So like that doesn't explain it. It's not because they enjoy punishment. It's not because they enjoy humiliation. They submit themselves to these things, and this is very important. because they think there's something in it for them that is worth all of this, right? And so you have to ask yourselves, well, what is it then that's worth so much? And there's where I arrived, like this idea of being the junior partner of global primacy, of Western primacy, of punching above the weight, of getting a huge benefit without paying the full like military price you would have to pay for it. Now I do want to say immediately that I don't actually believe that US military power was sort of the real reason for it maintaining primacy, because as we see, that military power very often means very little. I mean, they ultimately couldn't defeat the Taliban, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's always like, yeah, it's the funny tidbit of like the little fact of that the United States has not won like a war by itself since like the Spanish American War or something like that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, but they're still the strongest military power in the world, but you can be
Hmm.
that and still not win wars. And, as an anti militarist, I have to say that is because you really cannot win wars. And I don't mean this necessarily in this like sentimental way where you say, like, oh, like, you can never win a war because, like, it's the costs are just not worth it. Although I believe in that. Like, I think it's true. But it is actually really, really hard to win wars. And it is one of the constant fictions that's being dangled in front of us. And you may remember that when the war in Ukraine, the big one in 2022 started, that a lot of the European commentariat that at that moment sort of snapped and became all like, well, we have to win this war. Like for the first year or so, they thought it was absurd that we wouldn't win this war like we had won World War II against Hitler, and not against me. Like I'm on the other side, right? I'm in Austria, but they and you had to sort of, and these are, when I say commentariat, these are intelligent, educated people who read widely, who think they know history, who certainly feel smart enough to tell everybody else what to think. And they really lived with the notion that most wars around the world end in a decisive victory by the stronger side. And that is just not true. Like, if you look into quantitative data, which people have sort of, they've made the tables and everything, it's just not true because war is a horrible mess. And it never does the thing that you want it to do.
Yeah, I think that that's actually maybe a good point to also then mention is that then like the European general attitude, even still now with the Russia-Ukraine war, is this fictitious idea of some form of total victory that no one can actually like mention. That they can like kind of repeat the talking points of, well, until like all of Ukraine is sovereign again, which is a very confusing statement because what does that border entail? Does that entail Crimea as well? Also, historically, it is one of the hardest places on earth to fight, as we've also then seen as well with the last 3 years of a pretty much near stalemate after Russia moved in from the east and has kind of stayed there. Not to mention the insane amounts of life that then have been lost by both sides. But it really kind of it really kind of rewired, it seems like, the European brain for what military action within Europe needs to look like. And as we've seen then also too, in reaction to this kind of this you mentioned then kind of this like bowing down to the US's idea of Trump asking for the 5% NATO increase, or not 5% NATO threshold, countries kind of doing it. But where then have these actual security matters, how have they materialized? What does Europe then view as then a legitimate reinvestment in military against an apparent enemy that is supposed to have invaded us now at least 3 times over, according to the internet?
So about Russia, right? And the legitimate
Yes.
reinvestment to. So yeah, so it's true that there has been in the European discourse, and it's both at the elite level and at sort of the like sub elite, elite adjacent commentariat
Yeah. Like I
level.
know for just like general media in Germany, I think I see
Yeah, well,
like
Germany
once
is
a
particularly.
mess, but like once a week I'll see a thing from like T Online being like, "This is gonna be Putin's downfall," and I'm like, I don't think so.
It's really interesting because I recently moved back to Europe, but I lived in the US for 25 years, and
Hmm.
I got my education in security policy there, which meant I had to take these classes on like how much ton of bomb do you need to destroy a runway and things like that. And so like I'm not saying I know these things because I learned them, then I tried to forget them as quickly as possible. But what I did remember is that there are people who do nothing but like this is their daily bread and they're very good at this. And so I had an understanding that there exist entire classes of professionals who do these things as a profession, and that fact does inform the discourse in the US. And the discourse in the US, oddly, actually all of a sudden became a lot more rational than what was going on in Europe. And that to me as a European was very like, wow, this is extremely strange and disconcerting. And I have huge cognitive dissonance right now, but this is what it is. And you're right, like to this day on you kind of have like German TV for like 20 minutes, some guy in a uniform will talk to like a girl who's 25 in a cardigan, and she will be like all gung-ho about how this and that weapon is like deciding this and that battle over this and that village in Ukraine right now. And
Yeah,
it's
the Taurus systems need to be sent immediately. I am just a random person you found on the street.
Mhm. Right. And so there's a lot of that, and it's really like it certainly feeds on sort of a base level, a baseline of complete lack of information and awareness, which would be normal. Like the average American also doesn't know these things. But when these things then happen, there is sort of a layer of a professional class that injects, well, it tries to inject a little more complex knowledge about these things, and it's completely absent in Europe, right? Like in the US they can also then get carried away, like you can certainly like on Fox News, CNN, whatever, they also get gung-ho about war and like the awesomeness of American military power. And they have the same thing, like where they shoot some missile and it blows up, and then like you see the TV anchors sort of just fawning over the coverage and the footage of it. So like you can have that too there. But in Europe it was particularly sort of like unhinged. And I mean that not like in the metaphorical term, but like really unmoored from reality. Like really just floating in the air. And so you could see that. And then I did actually write my article, and like the article combines a lot of things. But one of the things that was very conspicuous was how in all of this debate of like rearmament, which started, obviously in 2022, but then sort of got ratcheted up in 2025, was a sense of putting the cart before the horse, putting the cart of just shopping off like old shopping lists that mostly were compiled by arms lobbyists and lay in their briefcases for years before the cart of actually like putting the horse before the cart, but like starting to buy up stuff before actually looking at like what does warfare look like right now, how is it changing, and
Hmm.
looking at the possible scenarios of war that might potentially be happening, and thinking what kind of war would that be and what would we actually need to fight that war.
It like perfectly in your article, you described the sense of Europe's obsession with tanks, which is always a very funny one because
Yeah.
they are, I loved, I mean, as someone who is, and Uma is as well, because, you studied also, war history, like being nerds of this stuff and seeing like, as you mentioned, the random German person just mentioning of like I just they need the leopard they need the leopard spy, they need them now. If Ukraine does not get these, they will not be they will not survive on the battlefield. It's like, well, you're right, the leopard spy will probably be taken out in 10 minutes by a like DJI drone. Like they are like this complete obsession within these old methods of warfare that Europe, of course, has a lot of money invested in. Rheinmetall needs to, and as you mentioned as well, they need to hand make these tanks because the assembly lines have been disassembled for mass production. But then also as well too within Europe's obsession with drones and then not understanding how drone warfare works at all. They think that every single drone must be a Shahed or something like that, and not understanding also that they're also maybe, if this is a possible threat, not also developing the proper infrastructure to, defensive infrastructure if they're so obsessed with drones. Like this just simply, these old obsessive checklists done by a lobbyist from like 1989 or something like that.
Even if they're newer, I mean, there's one little tidbit that's, you only will catch it if you're already sort of like alert to this, but it has been reported about Ukrainian troops and officers being trained in the West or observing training by the West, like, like especially war games by the West. And they go like, what the hell are you guys doing? Like, you're doing these tank battles or whatever battles as if drones weren't a thing. And so they tell this to their, like, like their counterparts is like, what are you doing here? Like, this is not what it looks like where we actually fight a war. And then, like, whatever, their Belgian or British or whatever colleagues, they say, well, we just have it like, we will add that module later or something. And there's a really sort of a classic book. I think it was published in 1976, and it's called the author is Dixon. I think it's called what is it? The Psychology of Military Incompetence. And it basically says that the personality traits that guarantee good, strong military careers are those that leave militaries worse than actually fighting wars. And you can just see that again and again and again. It's so and I'm just reminded of that, right? Like when you hear these examples again and again of how these Ukrainians are being trained by people who, like, sometimes in the second year of the war, I read an article about how Ukrainians were being sent, to the West to be trained, famously, as we know is happening. And they said they are training us in COIN, like counterinsurgency warfare that they learned in Afghanistan. And it's like, or they told them before the big.
You're fighting an actual military, like that makes no sense.
And or they said like before the summer offensive, that horrible bloody, just like really one of the worst things in 2023. That summer offensive, right, failed. Mm-hmm. Before that, they were training them on how to demine minefields that were like 10 by 10 meters. Like they were like, it was just completely. And meanwhile, like the largest area in the world anywhere now is mined in Ukraine. Like it's as big as like the state of Florida or something. Like just territories that are vast. And so there is a weird sort of and I don't think that's a particularly European thing. I think all militaries in the world suffer from this. They're always preparing for the last war, right? Which they also lost, but so there's that. And all that shopping has a lot more to do with lobbies, with catering to certain domestic industries. These industries, if you look at who owns these industries in respective countries, and not just in the big countries, but also small countries like Austria, Sweden, these are countries that have very sort of cloudy arms industries for what they are, well connected politically and have been for generations, also owned by the same people for generations. It more feeds into these things, or it serves also what people are saying, this is one place where the West can still put its capital and feel it's safe or something. So it checks other boxes other than what will this war actually look like, that we will most likely, and I'm not going to say have to fight, because I don't think you have to fight any war, but that they want to fight. My argument is they want to fight a war. And if you want to fight a war, you can already pretty much imagine what kind of a war against whom it's going to be. And so therefore you have a sense of what it would look like. But I want to be very clear. My argument is that they don't have to fight. We don't have to fight this war at all. There are plenty of other things we could do so that there isn't going to be a war, so that we don't actually, like when we talk about security, like what is security actually? Well, I would say security is we're not going to have more war in Europe. That should have to be the objective.
Yeah, I think they also, with all these purchases, and specifically about the tank uh, craziness obsession that Germany has, for example, it seems that these politicians, they just forget that war is so unpredictable as well. Like every war is so different. It just seems that like they want to purchase these big tanks, these big things, and then, as you guys said, like one drone is going to take it out, or even just one guy with like a gun. You know, like there's throughout war history, there's always stories of like this war hero that one guy just took out like 100 quote unquote superior soldiers in another, and yeah, it just shows how it's all linked to the lobbies that you were just mentioning.
Well, I think as well too, the thing that's very interesting with the Russia Ukraine war is that then it feels like, I mean, I know that we're focusing primarily on like the European side of this, but it is also something that then that intrinsically the Russian side has also not been able to react on very well either. Russia has attempted to use the Ukraine war as a proving ground for new weapon systems, and an over dependency on like the Wagner group that then ended up biting them in the ass, and really has, I mean, if one of the truths that then I think that then has happened of the Ukraine war that the United States has wanted to happen, given indirect, I mean, not indirectly, but more quietly, is to show them the inefficiencies of the Russian military. And I think that they've done that quite well. If that is like a goal that then Europe and the United States was trying to do, Russia's ability to react to then an offensive war that they started has then also like militarily led to a massive weakening of one of the largest militaries on earth. I mean, maybe that is possibly one of Europe's ultimate goals at the end of the day with this. But I think that you're very right in the sense that then at the end of the day, Europe is preparing itself for a war that they want to happen. It doesn't need to. It's very odd in the sense too that then when you bring this up to people of like, I don't think a war with Russia is entirely necessary, good, or predictable, or would be even be remotely easy, that's then seen as like a radical statement of like, oh well, you just love Russia then. And it's like, no, I don't like war, and I'm also aware of that in the sense of the capabilities of, although Russia may not be efficient, I'm really not stoked on the idea of a hypersonic missile like hitting Berlin either. Like, it is entirely frightening. But yeah, like there is, at least to then my understanding of it, there is at least like this goal has kind of ish been achieved, or am I just like maybe looking this like a bit too,
I think, I mean, to be honest, from the way I follow it and the way I follow both, events on the ground, but also discourses among relevant circles, like the military expert types. I think, yeah, Russia didn't look so great in the first year of the war, but from the moment that second that counteroffensive in 2023 started, Russia has been winning from that
yeah.
moment on every day on average. And I mean, like when the war started, the big one, I call it the big one because in Ukraine, where I've worked for a long time, people refer to it as the big one. The small one was the one that started in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
But when the big one started, some expert said, well, Russia always wins ugly. And to which I say, the notion that you can win a war in a clean and elegant way, so in a chivalrous way, is already bullshit. It's always ugly. It is by definition ugly and insanely destructive. There's no other pursuit that humans do where cost doesn't matter as little as it does in war, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nowhere else would we throw these incredibly pricey things and human lives into just like machines for destruction.
Oh yeah.
So, but I mean, basically, it has been winning so far, and it has learned a lot. Like it made mistakes, but then they stopped. Like, yeah, it like the Wagner, the PMC, like private military corporations. Actually, that model actually did a lot for them at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like it worked, and then it sort of became a hazard, and now it's gone. Like now it's not a thing, right? Like Wagner still exists, but it now does sort of like minor jobs in like faraway parts of the world for
Mm-hmm.
Russia. It's no longer in Ukraine. And everything they learned from them in Ukraine, they've integrated. If the idea was to weaken Russia and bleed them dry and show them up for how incompetent they are, I don't think that has worked. I think like the general assessment right now is that the two most capable armies capable at actually fighting large scale wars are the Ukrainian and the Russian ones. And most Western armies, including the US one, I mean, the US doesn't know how to fight wars like this. It hasn't fought a war like this in 80 years. So, well, maybe like 70 if you count the Korean War. So it really doesn't know it, and it doesn't know it under current conditions. And one of the things, why, Hegseth and them are like, they're so obviously like not in a good place, like mentally, if you just watch these people. And why Trump has just announced, like instead of $1 trillion, it's going to be $1.5 trillion funding for the military. That probably comes out of a sense of panic that there are certain things they actually cannot do. Like they can do some like A-team shit, like they just pulled off in Venezuela, right? But that's not actually winning a great big battle over a kill zone of hundreds of miles in some like frozen swamplands, which maybe they might have to do at some point. So I don't think Russia is looking so bad as a war fighting machine right now. The Russians seem to feel like they've settled in very comfortably. Like eventually their economy will sort of like cool down, and then things might get uglier for them in terms of being able to sustain this level of constant destruction. Because, but yeah, like this is, I don't know, like, but that's also that brings us back to what the Europeans think of, like we have to just defeat Russia. Like ultimately, when you sort of push them on like how, none of them can ever. They have no theory of victory. They have no theory of change. They have no. It all comes down to what what must not be cannot be.
Mm-hmm.
Like it cannot be. It must not be that we are not better than them, stronger than them, smarter than them, richer than them, more than them, and that we dominate them. And therefore, it must not be that they actually are not defeated based on that one thing.
I think this is a perfect transition to move to then where you're mentioning the sense that then that Europe has this idea and identity of then how they fit into like this primarily the unipolar world of the United States, and how Europe was definitely benefiting more so from their previous legacy rather than anything that Europe has done in the past 30 years. And this kind of bit of surprise that Europe felt that when, Trump mentions, I forget what the five nations were that he talks about, are kind of like the big five for him, and Europe is left out. So this reaction now has, I mean, this has not been based in Trump. I think that there is a bit of material, not just a bit, a lot of material reality of Europe just been coasting, simply just within the post Cold War, even during the Cold War rather. But where is then Europe currently finding itself in this major transitional phase of maybe not being as important as they thought that they did, or as they thought that they were rather?
So I want to. I mean, Europeans have been really surprised, or they act surprised. European leaders have been acting surprised that they've been asked by Trump, and that they should spend more on NATO, and that's of course total BS, because they've been asked that all the way through the Cold War, the post Cold War, and they were actually asked that during the Cold War too. Like there are quotes from is it Eisenhower actually said it. Like he came up with the term, was it Uncle Sucker? That was him. So like
I think so, yeah.
Like this has been around. This discourse has been around for a long time. I think the only thing that changed is that is something that used to be discussed in like conferences and like in NATO meetings, and it never made it into mainstream media in Europe, certainly. But like nobody in Europe, nobody in our elites had any right to pretend that they were surprised or shocked by that, because we all knew that was a thing. So that's where it begins. But I always felt that there was a huge sort of presumption here that had to be questioned. So after the Cold War, the argument from the US was, well, Europe should contribute more to its own security. It should do what's called burden sharing or burden shifting. And we do have to ask, what is that burden? What does it actually do? Having this much wealth and political wealth tied up in military things, in armies and in military hardware, what is it actually for? Do we need it to keep Europe safe and secure from actually existing threats? Or did you want us to contribute to maintaining your project of global primacy? And I think it was clearly the latter, because there was really no threat. Like, do we really think that like Europe was, safe from major, war by outside powers in the 90s and 2000s, 2010s because of NATO, because of the US? No, it's completely obviously bullshit. So like the burden was always something else. He was contributing to the burden of running global primacy. I also want to say, like, you could make an argument that Europe wasn't just the crown jewel in America's primacy, like in the unipolar order, but like the control over Europe had some very clear material benefits too. Like this is where a lot of bases are. This is literally the place from which they ran their wars in the Middle East, which they couldn't have run without that, or not as easily. So you could probably put a price tag on these things. I don't want to do that. I'm sure some people do, but like it was probably worth it to them, or else they wouldn't have done it. So the whole burden shifting and burden sharing thing, that's gaslighting to me already. And like it had to be questioned because nobody did question it for the last 35 years. So when the moment came when like a big war returned to the European continent, that was no longer the moment to do it. Now I would still do it, right? But like, nobody who matters does. So that's something like, and I don't think Europe has been coasting. I think it's very important when we look at power, what makes a country powerful, what makes a group of countries powerful. It's not just military stuff. Like it can be a lot of things that they do. One of them, very critically, is simply is of course economy, like the GDP, right? So that's very obvious. And that would apply to like the US or like China, right? But I think another one would be the human development that they can realize for their people. And again, like China punches so far above its weight there, because if you look at not all powerful countries, not all countries in the world have the same ratio of military and economic and sort of social well-being, right? So like China's power in the world has sort of grown astronomically, but it's the share of its military power has actually stayed behind compared to the way it has grown in other dimensions. And vice versa. Another sort of the counterexample to that would be Russia. Russia is, by population, it is a large country, the largest in terms of territory, but who cares? In terms of population, it's not that large. In terms of economy, it's not that large. Its economic growth model has been, until actually the last few years, been meh, not so, at times pretty good, at times not so much. But it does a lot more militarily. Like it punches above its weight there. First, it has the largest nuclear deterrent still, and now it has, the largest and actually war capable army in the world. So that's a way to think about it. Or if we look at countries in like, Brazil or Mexico that are really transforming just what they are like on the inside for their own people. When you have things like that, all of a sudden labor migration out of these countries stops, right? So like these are all measurements of power. And you ask, has Europe been coasting? No, Europe has not been coasting, because Europe has built a wonderful life for its citizens. It did so for the longest time. Now, it has some serious problems doing that, and it has basically made a choice to say goodbye to some of the things that were working best for it, like its social welfare states and its redistribution models and all of that. And those are things we need to work on at home. But certainly these are the ones that made Europe the envy of the world. And these are the reasons why people were trying to come to live in Europe. Um, that is not something, to poo-poo. Like, that's not coasting. If part of it was because of some like peace dividend and we stopped spending, it's like they say like, oh, it's because of the peace dividend we stopped spending so much on the military after the end of the Cold War. But like, we spent a lot on the military and on infrastructure and on developing our populations and giving them a better life during the Cold War. Like, somehow we could, walk and chew gum back then, right? And now we can neither walk nor chew gum, it seems.
Yeah, it has been very. I mean, I know that then throughout Europe, the levels of austerity that then are being put in place because of the obsession with then now. Well, we can't do both. God forbid we have a healthcare system and also, however hundreds of billions that they want to now invest, at least in Germany, into then like military infrastructure, which is always a weird one to me too, because I don't know how much money you could throw at the Bundeswehr for it to like actually function. Like, I don't think that then it's like that there's a number out there that could make the German military war ready, but apparently it exists. But in that, I guess in that sense too, of there is still then, there is still then this adherence to then U.S. policy still, regardless of, you mentioned this then before as well, that then this is kind of like on a, the elites of Europe have always kind of kept this as their, the, like, how do we have then, this, these cycles of new governments and this and that, but yet continuous, attitudes towards the United States remain the same. And it's very odd to then see kind of two things happening right now at the same time. One, Trump's action in Venezuela, which has then kind of had a very pacified reaction from Europe of just like, well, that's the US's problem. And then now the possibility of then Greenland being possibly a NATO issue, which now I don't understand. I mean, of course I understand the sense how one obviously becomes more important to the other within the European mind. But there seems to be at least like faults in this relationship, and this isn't just simply a Trump only thing. But where like what do then I guess we see then happening at the moment with Europe's possible relationship to the United States? Is it even threatened, or is this all just simply a guise for trying to then assume some level of power, which Europe does have, but they're also very willing to then give in to the United States, as it's kind of been seen to in the last few months? Or am I completely wrong? I don't know. Like, I'm just simply an outside observer, it feels like half the time.
I mean, I do want to say, so like, clearly something is changing in the world order.
Yeah.
And it's been a long time coming. In a way, primacy was always a fiction. It was always more an aspiration and an ambition than a reality. And so now that is becoming just very much, so much clearer. And then, of course, inside the US, like, it is true that inside the US, the maintenance of primacy and sort of the wealth shifting towards the military and away from the people really did sort of ruin the country's social well-being and its democracy. I think that we can say that now, like, like, that's what happened. And so on the one hand, that means like, okay, so if you're Europe now, like, why would you want to be like them, first of all? But also, like, it did sort of like, the end of primacy has come because the ruin that the pursuit of primacy created in the US led to Trump. Now, and Trump was elected, and his election was supported including by some quite serious people who genuinely believed that it would be the end of this, genuinely believed this, like, America first thing. Like, we are no longer going to go to foreign wars and, like, incur costs, around the world that we could instead, spend on ourselves. Now, I always thought, when I heard people say that, like, I knew people like in the international relations field who were like, they're not naive to say, okay, he's terrible in every single way, but if this is the one thing he does, it'll be worth it. And I said, like, you're deluding yourself. Like, look at the guy. Like, me as a feminist activist, like, I see someone who's obsessed with dominance and with zero sum power and with violence, and has this just gigantic chip on his shoulder. And all the people who are crowding towards him, Stephen Miller, Hegseth, and others, they are just like that. These people will never pursue a restraint-based foreign policy towards the world. Like that's just no way. Like they're, even like you're not supposed to explain international relations by resorting to like people's psychological problems and pathologies, but sometimes it's hard not to, right? Like clearly with this crowd, like and certainly, like again, like if you apply a feminist analysis to international relations, then yeah, like toxic masculinity, like it's just, it's so much in front of our eyes now that like you can't deny it, right? It's not an esoteric theory at all. Like it explains it better than any other theory of international relations that I can think of at this point. So um, the change of the international system is coming, is happening. The US has formally given up its aspiration to global primacy. That doesn't necessarily, like, so everybody's saying now, so does it mean we have like uh, agreed spheres of influence? And the answer to that is no. It's like the US claims one for itself and will do some really unhinged things like Greenland, Venezuela, to maintain it. But it doesn't mean that, sort of it respects, what other countries' spheres of influence would be. Not that they are even all that clear. And then, there are vast parts of the world, like there's Africa that like nobody's even clear, like, where would that even belong to? Like, and nobody's saying like, why aren't people just, can't be their own masters where they are, like, can't be in charge of their own places. So a new world order is happening. It was bound to happen. It was coming. It's now happening in a really messy way. Would there be a way to negotiate this in a positive, constructive way so that it's better for everybody? Yeah, absolutely. I think some parts of the world have actually been quite constructive about this. So, like during all these years of the big Ukrainian war, like occasionally there were like, I don't know if you've been following it, there've been peace proposals coming out of the global south by China, by Mexico, by Brazil. And in the end, they actually united and combined. And the principles that they put in these proposals, they were a beginning for a positive, constructive way of building a post-primacist order. I hesitate to call it multipolarity because already that term is so loaded, and people like just like on the one hand, some people see it as sort of like a return to like, I don't know, like 19th century spheres for influence, Halford, Mackinder, stupid things like that. And on the other hand, some people project sort of romantic notions of like, in the multipolar order, like Russia and China will then stand up for the people of Gaza. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
none of that. But in these peace proposals from the global south, there were the beginnings of having a constructive way of world making where everybody has to talk to everybody at eye level. Now, and this very thing, this notion of talking to everybody else at eye level, that I think is something that Europeans are just not capable of. And that is what makes them so freaked out when they lose like the protection in the protection racket that they used to inhabit as the Nepo baby of US primacy. They had protection, and that allowed them to go around, strut around the world, and behave themselves terribly. And that means, in very material terms, in sort of setting, unfair fair terms of trade or benefiting from, high interest loans to poor countries, blah 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 blah, and muscling their way into markets and forcing them open. But I also mean it in sort of in the psychological ways that you could be, a junior diplomat from, I don't know, Denmark. Let's say Denmark is a good one, right? And you could go to any 1/3 country into the world, and like your entire time there, you would not be meeting with your counterparts at eye level, but you would be teaching them something, lecturing them about something, leading some like development aid projects, which they are always about training and knowledge transfer. And that kind of like, it does something to you. I mean, these same people think like, wait, maybe tomorrow I have to meet with these same people, and now I'm no longer the big shit. Like now I have to actually listen to them and we have to talk eye to eye. Like, I think it does something to them. It makes them hyperventilate or something. Like, it explains their very strange reaction to this new time coming. But I think also, like, if power is a thing and power is a thing in this new order, I think the failure of the Europeans is to look at themselves and say, like, actually, we have power, and some of the power that we've created for ourselves in the world could be very positive, right? Because we have done not so badly, actually, at making a good life for our own people, and we've welcomed immigrants from all over the world who want to be part of that. So there's something here, right? And we can be, we don't have to be victims in this coming order, is what I'm saying. Not at all. Like, there isn't only like you either the top dog or it's, junior partner or a victim. Like, there's another way to be in another kind of world order. And that kind of creative envisioning is what I miss from European elites. Like, I miss it from, like, sort of intellectual academic elites. I miss it from the think tanks. I miss it from the diplomats. Occasionally some diplomat, some usually mid-level diplomat from some European country, like, contacts me out of the blue and says, thank you for this and that article, thank you for this and that post. I really hear you, like, this is so true and I wish we were doing it, but I can't talk about it with my colleagues. So there are, these people still exist, and some of them, like me, have like a few like secret meetings here and there where they like sort of, cry on each other's shoulders, I imagine. But it's actually really true. Like, this new order, it can be beautiful for all of us. It could be a better world. And, like, certainly Europe has amazing things to contribute. And a few years ago, it looked like we were going to do that. A few years ago, it looked like we were going to take the lead on green energy and on saving the climate. And now we're not. Like, we've sacrificed it to the god of war. And now maybe China will save the world, by its degree of innovation. But we can't even acknowledge that, right? We can only, like, we don't even have anywhere to put that information.
Interesting and really good example with the Danish mentioning Denmark, because also next week the Danish foreign minister is going to be meeting with Marco Rubio to talk about the whole Greenland. Well, the Greenlandic foreign minister is also going to be there. So I would love to be, like, I hope they also have footage of that, because that's going to be a very interesting meeting with the whole, like, talking eye to eye. But we know that Rubio is definitely not going to be talking eye to eye with them. If we look at their track record and the toxic masculinity that you mentioned earlier. But yeah, I do hope that there's footage of that, because it's going to be an interesting meeting.
It's going to be interesting. I mean, I'm sorry that we haven't even talked about the Greenland thing now. It is an obscenity, of course.
Yeah, it's horrible.
It is an obscenity, but it's also, like, basically it has revealed. Here's the other thing, like, the US has certainly done this thing towards other sort of isolated people, poor, research-rich territories, mostly on islands around the world, even as late as the 20th century. And we don't see it as such an obscenity because these were not part of the West, right? And, like, a lot of people, it's so funny, like, how a lot of people who are now upset over Greenland are basically like, but wait up, white people lived in it. It's like, wait up, you don't know that this is actually an indigenous population for the most part, right? And that it has its own very complicated history with the motherland, with Denmark, where you see the same patterns that you see of the oppression of indigenous peoples that you see anywhere, like, could be the Sami in Finland and Norway, could be, Native women in Canada. Like, you see some of the same patterns of like reproductive violence and like forced sterilization, and then taking their children away. So, like, these are all patterns that are very familiar with how white colonial masters deal with native populations. So it is, but it's not like the Greenland thing. The only thing that's different about it is that it concerns something that has a close relationship with Europe. Certain other parts of the world that, in sort of like you could have like I said, like remote island people, poor, resource rich, have certainly experienced that and not all that long. Like you could ask yourselves, what are all these Pacific possessions of the US where they have mostly like air bases and stuff, and how do people there live? Like what is it like for them, and how did these places come to be part of the US, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we've also like not mentioned a single thing too either about like Europe and the United States' position towards like Israel as well too, just being one that then
Yeah.
is, which I don't know if we have time to go into. We have talked about it so much on the show for the
Big
last
one,
year.
right?
Yeah, I think that if our listeners want to hear our takes on that, we have plenty of episodes of last year, and if not even longer. But that is, yeah, it is definitely Europe being very selective of when they are getting mad about something. I guess just simply a question that then kind of came into my mind about then like this new global order is that then has Europe's your reputation then internationally changed then under then this kind of this continuation of the order, as you mentioned, the sense that then that a lot of countries in the global south have kind of come forward and become more vocal. You mentioned the peace process. There's also been the case of, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was it Nicaragua who took Germany to the
Yep.
ICJ, if and so there have been South Africa as well too. There has been a it seems that then the global south has also been trying to like put not just Europe but the west, the general western powers kind of in their place. Is this something that then is a trend that then that we're going to be seeing? I guess we don't want to speculate, that's always bad, right? But has then currently Europe's position or its reputation internationally changed? Is this something, I guess, that also like China has maybe benefited from within the global south? It seems a bit that Europe is being questioned a bit more. I guess not to say so. Now that I think about it, there's an entire anti-imperialist movement during the Cold War, of course. It's not that then that like, anti-colonialism has been a thing for a while, but it seems that then that, there's been a bit more confidence on like the state levels of trying to at least like question, the European entity.
I mean, I would say, Europe's position in the world has changed, but also Europe's behavior and conduct in the world has changed. And it has changed in many, many ways. I mean, first of all, now we have an EU that conducts a joint foreign policy. Now, countries still conduct their separate foreign policies, and they at times contradict what the EU does or not be entirely in line. But certainly, EU diplomacy, foreign policy making towards the world is very much a thing now, and it's become more so in the last decades, in the last 20 years or so, I would say. And so what that has also meant that a lot of diplomats from very small European countries that would otherwise not have had an embassy in, I don't know, the Gambia or somewhere, now all of a sudden they do because of the EU, and like they can serve there. And it's sort of, like they start to think, like, I don't know, like if you're from, I don't know, Estonia, and it's a totally random example, of course, no, and you get posted for the EU to like Malawi, where you otherwise wouldn't have been if you were just from Estonia because they don't have an embassy there. You're all of a sudden representing a big, powerful bloc, and like actually that goes to people's heads, and they start to think that's normal, that you're there as like a big, powerful, but also donor and sort of like someone on whom people are dependent and have to look up to. And yeah, and so like that has certainly affected sort of the psychology of a lot of people who work in Europe in foreign policy. I think also a lot of European countries that used to have more of an independent foreign policy that came out of their own idiosyncratic histories, that sort of went away in the post Cold War era. Like you could think of like two examples: Sweden and Austria during the Cold War, the late Cold War. Like Bruno Kreisky in Austria being the first Western leader to even recognize Palestinians and talk to them, right? In like the 70s, or Olaf Palme in the 1980s. Like
Mhm.
that was anti-imperialism coming out of Sweden, and it was credible and it was real. It wasn't a fake thing. Like you have other strands in Swedish foreign policy, but you have that, and now you only have those. Now you have only like the big sort of like anti-Russian geopolitician, like European primacist, and the very genuine sort of Olaf Palme type of strand of foreign policy thinking, that's gone. I don't see it anymore in Sweden.
Oh, especially, I mean, even in the sense of like Germany with the position that then like the SPD had in like the 70s and 80s towards Israel is like unheard of now. Like, not that then that
Right.
they recognized Palestine, but there was at least like a conscious understanding of that, then maybe Israel's position is not always, the most correct one. And this is then something that has been entirely extinguished from, at least the German media class to a degree. It's ever changing, but yeah.
There is a notion that in Europe, so it goes unspoken, but like the foreign policy posture that we have now, we've always had it, and that is just so like not true. Like, you don't need to be a student of modern European history. You just need to be old enough, like me, to have to remember some of this, right? Like, it used to be
Yeah.
different. So like Europe's position in the world has changed, but not because it's just been sitting pretty and like things changed around it, but because it has changed a lot in the last decades. Um, and I think that's particularly also true in the global south. And we see that where some European countries buck that trend a little bit, like Spain is very interesting, right? Like Spain has not joined the 5% NATO spending because it says, it like Sanchez literally said, like, they're not going to come marching, the Russians are not going to come marching across the Pyrenees. Which was very much like, nobody says it, but I think everybody thinks it all the time, right? But he's sided with 5 large Latin American countries. I think Brazil, Mexico, Uruguay, 2 more, on the Venezuela thing, and put out a very clear statement, and then even doubled down on it again. And like the question is why, and there are a lot of reasons. One of them is like the very strong sort of like leftist politics in Spain right now. So like it could just be like it could be over the next round, but that's not true in Spain. Even the conservatives, even on the other side of the center, largely agree with that. And they have, like, Spain has built a different foreign policy with Latin America over the last decades in a very pragmatic way. Like, a lot of it is about migration, actually, because they're very open to migration from that part of the world. But so they've been very critical about what was just done in Venezuela. But at the same time, Spain is the country that actually gave asylum to Gonzalez, the guy who won the election against Maduro and had to flee, right? So like, it's not that they're like fans of Maduro or anything like that. They just, they actually pursue a principled foreign policy, and like you could see it on Israel too. And it's interesting that, again, also Slovenia, which has also been sort of like everybody's, like, how can a country be so pretty and so righteous at the same time? But like, again, like, they've been very different from the European mainstream on Israel and Gaza, and they've now again on Venezuela, they've called out like this is a violation of international law. While Friedrich Merz, from like the largest and most powerful European country, has like, ooh, it's complex. I have to think about this some more. So it's not, like, there are a few outliers, but for a lot of others that have more interesting autonomous traditions of being players in the world, they've sort of forgotten them, or they've sort of just been like blanched out by being part of this like EU uniporage, like, I feel that way. So will we see this trend more? I mean, there is this old story, and it's sort of almost a stereotype that like China goes to countries and say, we will build a hospital and we'll build a bridge and an airport. And the US and Europe come to countries in like the global south and say, like, we want to lecture you on, I don't know, LGBT rights. And then the countries in the global south say, like, please the bridge, but not the lecturing. And like, so the story goes, right? But I mean, it's a tired stereotype, but it's also, I think, very, very true.
Yeah.
Like, for a lot of these countries, China is simply like partnership with especially Europe over the last, especially I want to say 10, 15 years, has become a bit out of whack in that you get a lot of the lecturing and very little of the material benefits. And that is also a function of how Europe and European countries structure their foreign aid deployments, because you might have an embassy in a country of like 15, 20 staff members, but they fund 50 to 70 development aid people and NGOs. And then like these NGOs didn't employ like hundreds of locals more. So like it's completely out of whack. And if you see yourself mostly as a development aid donor in country X, like you are in a you're not certainly not in a position of equals anymore. Like it's not an eye to eye relationship. They're not just financially dependent on you, but like you feel like you sort of enter this country, you entered a relationship with this country from the assumption that things are bad there because they don't know stuff and they do things wrong. And that's where we come in, right? And like we tell them how to do things right and like how to know stuff. And then we give them a little bit of money to like do some like practice rehearsal projects. So I think that has an influence on it too. Will China benefit from it? I mean, the last 3 years, certainly, I think China's prestige around the world has grown a lot from how it has behaved itself in this impossible situation, because certainly the EU and the US prestige has gone down in the world massively, like first over Ukraine and then ultimately over Gaza. It's just like, it's irreversible, it's irredeemable, and frankly, it's well deserved. And so China basically just had to sit there and not be too stupid. Right. And
that's not a hard task to do.
It's like, yeah, like now you don't have to be particularly appealing to look good, you know, compared especially to like Trump. These people are just going berserk. Like they're like ugly American, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, it always is a thing too that then just on the show that we just kind of constantly joked about of just like what would Europe look like, especially if like Jean-Claude Juncker was still there, because his policy toward things are weirdly like, I mean, Ursula von der Leyen is kind of the perfect person in power right now for this like Europe, Germany, US relationship, because she kind of like, you know, Trump says jump, she's like how high, and then actually she, you know, never did it because actually the meeting that then was supposed to happen never happened, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She just like is constantly there to then get, you know, more or less played by the U.S. It seems like that, like the trade deal that she bragged about, that Trump bragged about, that then has never really happened. Where it's always this kind of thing of like, one of the things at least that, I mean, Juncker, for all the problems that he did have, he was at least like a tad more honest of like the general European opinion, particularly on like foreign policy things. And it's what the world could have been maybe if Germany didn't leave the EU.
Yeah, we talk about this with friends a lot. You know, we talk like, oh, like why can't we have Willy Brandt? Why can't we have Bruno Kreisky? Why can't we have Juncker? You know, like why do we have von der Leyen? And
I just want my drunk Luxembourgian man running Europe. That's the most European thing. I
also feel like it's there's no lack of intelligent, original people in these elites. Well, maybe not at the very top, because, you know, they get sort of like,
yeah,
for them. But the people who are there, they are the symptom of structures and of systems, right? And these are the people who rise because they're convenient to the structural realities, and they serve them well. So this is not a coincidence, right? Like, it's also not a coincidence that Kaya Kallas has replaced Josep Borrell. He's not awesome, but he's, oh my God, like I was making fun of him all the time he was there, but now like, oh my God, I wish we'd him back. So
exactly.
But I mean, it's not a coincidence that, you know, no, of course he was old and he was going to no longer, you know, he wasn't time, so that was clear, like he was going to be switched out. But, you know, that he was one of the few people who had actually critical things to say about Gaza. And, you know, like to Kaya Kallas, Gaza is like not even a thing. Like she doesn't care. Like she's just completely about Russia. And it's very convenient for a lot of people. So you have her there and like she checks certain boxes. But because she's just so untenable in so many ways, like nobody in Washington, D.C. will meet with her. She doesn't go there because nobody will see her.
Damn, that's embarrassing to be like that gung-ho for it and they don't even care about you.
Well, I mean, it's true. Now, if she was very, very good, if she was excellent, I mean, the thing is that whole position really shouldn't be there. I think it has only created confusion.
Yeah.
Like there was a time when the treaties first created this position, I was very young, a student. I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome. You could be the foreign policy person for the whole EU. Like, this is like a dream job. And then you look at it now and you realize like actually like this position should not exist because it creates confusion and it sort of creates like a race to the bottom sometimes. Like um it's also like you don't want to have a person who can make really out there decisions and ideas without having a clear path of checking with the rest of us, let alone democratic accountability. So it's actually like something here went structurally wrong. Like they created a bad institution here. Like it can only ever, at best it can be a nothing, and at worst it can make things worse. But I don't see how it could make things better, frankly.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there are like so many contradictions within the European Union, and there is like I feel the foreign policy one is one of the ones that then drastically does like inflict the which level of sovereignty matters more for Europe sort of thing. You know, if then like these are all individual decision makers on their own state levels. Most of them surely are NATO members, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there are still the idea then of conscious decisions to be made by then all individual 27 members. And then the idea then of the EU just coming and be like, actually, we're all thinking this. And then especially just in the sense of someone with just the track record of Kaya Kallas being in that position too is just a continuous like it just extends the contradiction even further, I guess. You know, like her obsession with Russia, but then also just made a bunch of money from, you know, illegal dealings with Russia with her and her husband. It I don't know. It definitely makes it makes at least me feel like living in this that then it's just like, oh, like I'm just being taken for a fool at this point by everything at the European Union level.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I always like, we always joke like they put these people in because they have compromat on them.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it is the perfect institution to fail upwards.
Fail is not even, doesn't even.
No, you
you have to be fail and corrupted and be convicted a few times. Like Borrell was convicted of insider trading, right? Yeah, he has a conviction for insider trading. So yeah, like totally. And this is why I'm saying like it feels like we want these people to have, you know, we have compromat. Someone somewhere has compromat on them. Like I don't know. No, I'm kidding. Do these decisions need to be made at the national, at the EU level? Like it's actually not completely clear how this weird institution of the high representative of foreign and security policy, where they get the instructions from and how they coordinate those with the member states. Because this is not trade, right? On trade, the commission really has the first say, and then the council just has to like sort of like vote it, you know, on or off. Like we just approved the Mercosur deal apparently earlier today. But in foreign policy, it's not like that. So it's actually unclear. And when you have things that are unclear, like you're just inviting institutional confusion. So that's definitely happening here. And I just don't see the added benefit of an institution that is so badly constructed. The assumption that all the countries would always have a joint foreign policy, I mean, that needs questioning too. I mean, this all comes out of a period when there was just true enthusiasm for more and more integration. These are the remnants of the European constitution process that failed, right? There was a time in the early 2000s when there was an idea to have a constitution, and that failed. And like some of the bits and pieces of that sort of we got stuck with them, and now they're here, and they're sort of like they're like grist in the mills. Like there's something isn't quite working with them. And it's really just not clear like who like who has the final say. And so you have these constant situations, you know, and it does then happen very rarely, but it does happen where like either Kaya Kallas or von der Leyen says something, and then they get slapped down by one of the national governments. And it happens very rarely that it is in public. And we can just imagine that it probably happens a lot in the background that we don't hear about. But that's not a good way to make foreign policy. I think I mean, this is also not a question of we're reverting back, like what role does Europe play in this new global order, and what does power mean? And do we have to be unified? Like in order to be powerful, do we have to be united and integrated? And a lot of people are now saying, well, obviously with what's going on in the world and what the US is doing to Europe, the only chances we have is if we now create a federation, a European federation, and if that federation is also armed, right? And to me, like, all the alarm bells go off at this point.
Yeah,
We're
the
already
the
seeing, federation at this point would mean just an enormous democracy deficit, like the complete lack of accountability, and the same with armament. Like, why? Like, seriously, like, you want the European nuke, and then who's going to push that red button? Von der Leyen?
Macron.
Like,
No, Macron, baby, our Jupiterian king will get what he always wanted.
yeah, well, he's hopefully very soon. No, but like, these are important questions. Like you've said, in these institutions, we see people rising who fail up. And then they would be the people who have an inordinately greater amount of power over issues with far more consequence for us and the rest of the world than they do now. Like, how is that a good thing? Like, and we have less and less democratic oversight over them and accountability. And so this is I think the danger of the moment is that sort of it brings out all the worst ideas out of the woodwork, sort of this idea that the EU needs to be militarized and it needs to be federalized. And like, I'm actually not opposed to the idea of integration in many ways. Like, I think a lot of things can be gainfully integrated as long as you preserve democratic accountability. Like, if you create functional, robust democratic, like real democratic accountability, which we don't have now, and where it's actually clear for citizens who's responsible for what, which we don't have right now. Because right now, a lot of the decisions are actually made by the member states, but then they make it look like the EU did it, right? But it was really them. And so that's also not good. Like, that's not functional. And it's a way for them to avoid democratic accountability. So at this point, I think I would say, like, I don't care what role we're going to play in the world. Like, we have to be okay at home before we can even think about it. To rush, like we've talked about how we rush to, militarization and buying up, weapons without thinking, but we are also rushing towards federalization and changing EU institutions, at least in practice, if not even by law, before we're ready for that, at a time when it's really not a good idea. And I think it's far more important to work on that than to say, well, we have to do that now because otherwise we can't be powerful in this world. We cannot defend ourselves, which I don't believe.
I definitely can agree with the sentiment that then Europe needs to understand its place in the new world order, as that it doesn't need to be this obsessive, I mean, as you mentioned perfectly. I'm just thinking when you were mentioning the sense of these NGOs that go into particularly the global South and whatnot from Europe, and this very much talking down to way of conducting business that Europe is so used to. I mean, there is, like, Europe is going to have to get used to, speaking at other nations that or other, actors on eye level. And it's just the curiosity of when that then is going to happen. Cause it kind of has to, like, I mean, like at least in the sense of wanting a productive relationship with the rest of the world that then is, gaining more types of sovereignty and is trying to then not so necessarily be under the thumb of the US or under this or under that. Europe needs to really change its attitude towards that. I mean, that's I think one of the clearest.
I mean, the Greenland moment is a really interesting moment because there's really only, so, like, of course, what can we do about this? Well, we can maybe try and, like, persuade Trump to be nice, right? Like, to keep him sweet, to bribe him. I think we should stop doing that. But so the only two options that are left, one is that we can successfully militarily deter the US. Now, that's obviously nonsense.
Giving Greenland a nuke.
No, I mean, even if we keep nukes out of the debate, I mean, the Europeans cannot deploy conventional forces to Greenland in a necessary extent where it would be a real. And they can't do that, because at every sort of like key point, at every leverage point, NATO has been built to require American capacities at all of these key points. Like there's so many gaps that we can't fill because they used to be filled by the US in the framework of NATO. So we can't even do it. So we can exclude that one. And the other one would be basically like we threaten with trade war. Like we tell the US this is going to cost you. Now, that one, I think, is only feasible, would be only feasible if we could rally the support of the rest of the world, where others will also say, like, actually, you shouldn't do that. Like, you shouldn't occupy another country. Join whatever threats of sanctions or trade wars or tariffs or whatever. But we've just burnt all the bridges with all of the world. We have been telling them that, like, they either my way or the highway. You either join us on our Russia sanctions and on everything we do, or you're like, we don't talk to you and you don't exist in the world. Like, we keep saying Russia is isolated, but Russia is only isolated by us. Like, we don't even see the rest of the majority of the world, right? Like the global majority, like literally, that is not isolating Russia. So we have burnt those bridges very exhaustively and efficiently and sort of repetitively over the last few years. And to now come to them and say, would you please side with us, is a little like, I think, frankly, nobody in Brussels is even thinking about that. Like, nobody's even thinking, should we ask China for help? Should we, go elsewhere in the global south and say, this is a bad idea. And so there's a lesson here about, like, how to build the way to prevent ever being vulnerable in this world is to make sure that the largest part of the world will always want to be in solidarity with you. And that takes work and effort.
Yeah.
It takes for you to show genuine solidarity and eye-to-eye solidarity at all times too. And you can't fake it and you can't rush to it. But I think really that's what it is. If we want to have, okay, this is going to sound so like woke and sentimental, but like, in my feminist circles, we always say, like, not power over, but power with. And it's so true, right? Like, if you have bullies going berserk like Trump, the way to have power over them, like to have power in the world and to resist that, would be to have power with others. Right? Like, if you could only, if you could only persuade just a few major global South countries to be with you on this and stand up, just not threatening military anything, just, like economic, political, diplomatic, we could be safe. And we could maybe create a space. Like, we're so far from creating a space where we could talk about the Greenlanders and the injustice that has happened to them and the needs that they have on what they want in the world. Like, we can't have this conversation now, because now it would immediately be exploited by one side or the other. There's just, like I'm saying, there's no space for it now. But by elevating everything to the stupid, like, big boy geopolitics, we're systematically closing those spaces in which we can have conversations about what is justice, what is oppression, what is equality, what is solidarity. And what is actually, how do we actually make a world in which it's actually you want to live in?
I think that that's an excellent place to end our conversation. Almut, thank you so much for coming on. Where can our listeners find you at?
So they can find me under my real name on X, and then on there is also my Substack, and on my Substack is all the other stuff I publish. But I do want to say, like, I still like to think that my main work is not publishing things, but like hands-on activism. I feel like chaining myself to some fences of some arms companies or something. No, but like, honestly, like, it's kind of hard right now how to be an activist in a good way, like to where it makes it. I'm sort of trying to find my way back to that. But yeah, so on X, and then they can find everything from there. And if somebody wants to contact me, also there, or like on LinkedIn or whatever. I'm the only person in the world with that name, so you can find me.
We'll put all your info then in the description. Before we go, just one quick thing to announce. On January 22nd, that is on a Thursday, I will be hosting a talk about Germany and the Palestine movement at Cafe Angles. It starts at 7 p.m. It has a star-studded panel. Info will be in the description. It is free. Come by. See a lovely talk that then I'll be heading, and you can hang around for a drink or two if you would like as well. Again, that's the 22nd of January, 7 p.m. at Cafe Angles in Neukölln. If you are in Berlin, if you aren't in Berlin, feel free to come by. It will also be recorded as an episode too, so if you miss it, don't worry, you can still hear it. But yeah, and of course, always too, if you want to hear more of our show, join the Patreon. 5 of whatever your currency is, be it US dollar, euro, or British pound per month, and you get all the extra good, fun stuff that we offer. So once again, Alma, thank you so much for coming on, and we will catch all of you guys then, hopefully on the bonus feed. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for the invitation.